Hi, I'm Dr. Dave Janda. Welcome back to Operation Freedom Briefings. The goal of these briefings and my weekly radio show, Operation Freedom, is to provide you information the bought-off lamestream fake media is never going to touch. You can join us live every Sunday from 2 to 5 Eastern at davejanda.com. We simulcast the show on davejanda.com. Emanates out of the People's Republic of Ann Arbor, Michigan, out of Wham Talk 1600. Go to davejanda.com every Sunday, 2 to 5. Hit that red button in the right-hand corner. Listen to us live. Great guests, great analysis. Again, information you're not going to get. Join us at davejanda.com for our public information that we upload, usually on a daily basis, free. We also have a subscription service, 30 cents a day, biggest bang for the buck in all the internet, where we deep dive on issues. We have the WTF show, the Insider Insight show, the Department of Advanced Research show, our contributing editors section, and healthcare symposium section, all available for our premium service subscribers. Again, tremendous amount of free content as well. Today I want to focus on Trump's boot is right on the throat of the deep state, and they're screaming. What do I mean by that? Just look at the hysterical reactions we've been getting over the past week, whether it's Hillary Clinton's tweet storm, Adam Schiff, that congressman from California that recently threatened Trump about crossing a red line. That was a veiled threat, I believe, in an assassination. And then we had Moonbeam Brown, Jerry Brown, essentially saying, we need to get rid of this guy. They're panicked. The deep state is panicked, and they're mobilizing their puppets against them. Now look, I believe this is all about the game of dominoes. When one falls, the second's going to fall, and it's going to set off this cascade of dominoes that ultimately will lead to the restitution of the rule of law, something that we lost decades ago to the deep state by design, by the deep state's design, and they allowed their puppets, if you will, to implement their plan. Puppets, by the way, on both sides of the aisle, right? One political party, the Republicrats, owned and operated by the deep state, the globalist syndicate, however you want to refer to them as. Now look, the first domino is restitution of a set of judges in the majority of the Supreme Court that is dedicated to the rule of law. Now, I have been critical of Kavanaugh in a sense that I felt that Trump should have appointed someone who was not tied to either the Bushes, the Clintons, or the Obamas, all known globalist puppets. The Kavanaughs are tied to the Bushes. However, I wanted to see what happened in his confirmation hearings, and we're going to get to that a little later in this presentation. But I believe after watching those confirmation hearings and then this latest hearing about his sexual abuse and harassment when he was in high school of Christine Blaney Ford, I really come to the conclusion that prior to the nominating Kavanaugh, Trump, I believe, was convinced that Kavanaugh would be an outstanding judge with the restitution and be committed to the restitution of the rule of law, which would give that Supreme Court a 5-4 majority on a reset of the rule of law. And I believe this is why the deep state is so intent on trying to block him. At a minimum, extend it out through the midterms. Hopefully they win enough seats in the midterms where they can hold this up even further. Possibly, I think in their delusional thinking, hold this up for a couple years. That ain't going to happen, especially with Trump running the show. So the first domino in Trump's world is getting that Supreme Court in a 5-4 majority. Second domino is the declassification issue of the FISA warrants, of the text between McCabe and Comey, of the 302 forms that the FBI filled out when they interviewed Bruce Orr, the number 4 guy in the Department of Justice under Obama. It's my understanding that that fake Russian dossier, it's been pinned on Fusion GPS and this Glenn Simpson character, obviously paid for by the DNC and the Hillary Clinton campaign. It's my understanding that the prime author of that document was probably Bruce Orr. And Glenn Simpson and Fusion GPS did some editing. So in other words, that document, that fake Russian dossier, which was used to try to overturn the election, which has been found to be fake, was actually written by someone high up in the Obama administration. And I believe when it all comes out, and this is why they're so intent in trying to block this declassification of the FISA warrants, of the text between McCabe and Comey, and of the 302 forms, because I believe it will lead directly to the West Wing of the White House under Obama. And it comes down to sedition and treason. First domino, rule of law, 5-4 majority in the Supreme Court. Second domino, declassification of the documents. Now, if the Department of Justice doesn't move on this quick, what's going to happen is Trump's going to knock over that domino all by himself and release it on his own, unredacted. And then the third domino is the utilization comes to the forefront of military tribunals. My sources have told me military tribunals are already, quote, operational. But they will become more to the forefront in this reset of the rule of law after the declassification process, because the documents are such a smoking gun once they are declassified. It will automatically lead to the implementation of military tribunals. The deep state is trying to block the first domino from falling, to prevent from knocking over the domino, and declassification to prevent the domino from falling over on the military tribunals. Because when it comes down to military tribunals, the targets are the deep state players and their puppets. That first domino is the seating of Brett Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court, giving the Supreme Court a 5-4 majority of folks dedicated to the restitution of the rule of law. Now, this past week, we went through this hearing where both Blasey Ford and Kavanaugh testified. The pundits in the bought-off lamestream fake media were championing how Blasey Ford's testimony was so compelling. Well, I watched it, and she contradicted her story from the letter she sent Feinstein to what she told a therapist back in 2012 to what she testified about. And there were 3 people, there were 4 people, there were more than 4 people, there were 5, there were 6. So a critical part of the story changed. Now, as a physician that had to take a history from 150,000 people I took care of in my 32-year career, if you had someone that kept changing the story, the history's probably not going to be that accurate. And that was one thing I saw. The other thing is that the people that she had listed as eventually as the people that were there all denied that the party even occurred. Kavanaugh said it didn't occur. Okay, well, he's a vested party in this, obviously, so take him aside. But then her best friend from high school reportedly said, no, I wasn't at this party. And then the 2 guys that supposedly were there, the judge and another guy, said, we weren't there either. This never happened. And then when she was pushed about where this happened, which was miles away from her house, she was 15, she wasn't driving, she could not tell Rachel Mitchell, who was the sex crimes prosecutor who was asking her and Kavanaugh down the line questions, she could not identify how she got there. And even more importantly, she could not identify how she got home. She did admit she had a ride, but she didn't say from who. So here is a young girl who reportedly was sexually molested. Horrible event. Horrible. Ran from the house, miles away from her own home. Whose house, we don't know. Because all the other players, it wasn't her house. She admitted that. It wasn't Kavanaugh's house. Said that. But the other people that were reportedly at the party, it wasn't their house either. So did they just go into some random house and have a party? Okay. She ran from this house, and she admitted she got a ride home. But she couldn't remember from whom. Well, wait a minute. You just had these guys abusing you. Did you get in a car with another guy and drive away? There were no cell phones back then. Did she go to a place and call somebody to pick her up? Because she never told her parents about this, so it wasn't her parents or her brothers who drove her home because they've never admitted to that. So there are so many critical missing parts of this story. And then after Rachel Mitchell got done interviewing her, she wrote a 5-page memo about interviewing Blasey Ford and interviewing Kavanaugh. Here's what she said, and this is from Zero Hedge, and you're not going to hear Rachel Maddow, Morning Joe, or The View, or Anderson Cooper, or any of those deep state-owned puppets talk about this. Rachel Mitchell memo highlights weaknesses in Ford testimony, exonerates Kavanaugh. I quote, I do not think a reasonable prosecutor would bring this case based on the evidence before the committee, nor do I believe that this evidence is sufficient to satisfy the preponderance of the evidence standard, end quote. Rachel Mitchell, the veteran sex crime prosecutor who was chosen by the GOP and the Judiciary Committee to question Christina Ford and Brett Kavanaugh, sent a memo to senators calling Ford's allegations a, quote, he said, she said case that is even weaker than that, end quote. In her 5-page memo, Mitchell wrote that she was presenting her, quote, independent assessment of the allegations, end quote. She said this was based on her independent review of the evidence and her nearly 25 years of experience. She alleged in the document that, quote, the activities of congressional Democrats and Dr. Ford's attorneys likely affected Dr. Ford's account. Look, if this really was about addressing the abuse of women, which is what it should be about. I mean, there are thousands, tens of thousands of cases that are legitimate. And when someone comes forward 30-some years later and cannot provide specific, important information, I mean, the biggest smoking gun to me is she could not identify how she got home. Who was her savior who drove her from those madmen from that house? I mean, it would be seared in my memory. It would be seared in anyone's memory. Your savior, the person who rescued you. She couldn't identify who that was. But if this really was about the abuse of women, how Dianne Feinstein handled the situation. Blasey Ford reportedly said to Feinstein, this is confidential, this is not coming out. It appears that one of Feinstein's aides is the person who released that letter, who destroyed the confidentiality of Blasey Ford. Blasey Ford, when she testified, and this is concerning, testified that she was a psychologist. Now that implies, by saying she's a psychologist means she's board licensed, she's board certified. That's a really important distinction. I've talked to some of my friends who are psychologists. It's a big deal. You don't say, you can say you're a psychology researcher, you're a psychology professor, but if you say you're a psychologist, and I believe she said she was, in her testimony, a research psychologist, it means that you have gone through the rigors of being board certified and board licensed. I did a little check. In the California records, I cannot find her to be board licensed. So in other words, she perjured herself within the first couple minutes of her testimony. But if this really was about the abuse of women, why are people like Dianne Feinstein and everybody else on that panel, as you look at that panel on the right-hand side, the panel's left, why are they not pointing a finger at Keith Ellison from the DNC, who there are medical records and police reports, of which Blasey Ford doesn't have any from back when she was 15 and Kavanaugh was 16 or whatever he was. But in the Ellison case, there are police records and medical reports of how he beat up his girlfriend. But nobody's talking about that. And frankly, I have a hard time with all his hypocrisy when I go back in time and remember Ted Kennedy, who was drunk, who was involved in the murder of a woman when he drove off a bridge and left her there to drown. Speaking of Ted Kennedy, this from Zero Hedge. It's actually, there's a tie. There's a tie to this recent issues with Blasey Ford. Was Kavanaugh accusation an orchestrated hit involving former Anita Hill advisor? This from Zero Hedge. An audio recording purportedly from a July conference call suggests that Christine Blasey Ford's sexual assault accusation against Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh wasn't simply a reluctant claim that Dianne Feinstein sat on until the 11th hour. Remember, Feinstein sat on this for 6 or 7 weeks. If they were really intent investigating, they would have gotten the FBI. They would have let the White House know. They would have let the Republican side of the committee know about this issue. They didn't. She sat on it for 6, 7 weeks until they leaked it at the very end. If they were really interested in the welfare of Blasey Ford, about this issue, about sexual abuse of women, they would have jumped on this right away. Feinstein had a one-on-one meeting, face-to-face, private, with Kavanaugh, never brought this up. If I was Feinstein and I had this information given to me, I would have confronted him right then and there. And I would have handed it over to the FBI, to the Trump White House, and to the other side of the committee to investigate it, because they have their own investigative staff. They did none of that. Which makes me think this really isn't about the welfare of Blasey Ford. This isn't about the welfare of women and abuse of women, which it should be, but about a political hit job. This recording, this audio recording, was between Feinstein's office and someone by the name of Ricky Seidman. Yeah, a former Clinton and Obama White House official and Democratic operative who advised Anita Hill during the Clarence Thomas hearings and who was an advisor to Blasey Ford. Oh. Maybe this is why her story kept changing. Remember that whole thing about her being nervous to fly? She admitted during her testimony she wasn't. She flies all over the world. Indonesia, Hawaii. But that's why she didn't want to come to Washington, according to her attorneys. Her attorneys, who were arranged for Blasey Ford by who? Dianne Feinstein. So rather than turning this information over to the FBI and to the Republicans on the committee or to the Trump administration, what did Dianne Feinstein and her staff do? They sat on the letter for 6 to 7 weeks. They arranged for Democratic operatives to be involved and speak with and coach Blasey Ford, and then they sat on it until the 11th hour. Seidman, who I just spoke to you about, Ricky Seidman, former Clinton and Obama White House official. This is where Ted Kennedy comes in. As a senior principal at TSD Communications, and in the past, worked as an investigator for Senator Ted Kennedy. I wonder if this Seidman person, if she ever investigated her boss, Teddy Kennedy, and how he murdered Mary Jo Kopechne. He left her to drown in a car after he drove it off the bridge. And then sauntered back to his hotel and went for a little nap while she drowned. I wonder if she ever investigated that. This is what Seidman said. Quote, "Well, I think at the outset," and this was back in July, "looking at the numbers in the Senate, it's not extremely likely that the nominee can be defeated," said silently. "I would absolutely withhold judgment as the process goes on. I think that I would not reach any conclusion about the outcome in advance," end quote. Why did she say that? How about because she was coaching? She was manipulating Blasey Ford. Rather than look out for the welfare of Blasey Ford and get to the truth, they decided to manipulate the situation to block that domino from falling over. And what was the one thing Kavanaugh did to set the deep state off to take him down? Because he announced in his Senate confirmation hearing that he was about the restitution of the rule of law. And how do I know that? Because go to Lindsey Graham's questioning in the initial confirmation hearings of Brett Kavanaugh. Of the 30-minute questioning, it marked 25:42 into the testimony. Here's what happened. Lindsey Graham asked him, Judge Kavanaugh, did you know the United States is now in a state of war, as authorized since September 14, 2001, under the provision of the authorization for the use of military force, military tribunals? Kavanaugh, yes. Judge Kavanaugh, did you know, aside from federal and national criminal laws, the United States now operates under the law of armed conflict, also known as the law of war. Are you aware of that? Kavanaugh, yes. Do you know the significance of the U.S. Supreme Court decision Johnson versus Eisentrager that states the U.S. Constitution does not confer a right of personal security or an immunity from military trial and punishment upon an alien enemy engaged in the hostile service of the government at war with the United States? Tribunals. Yes. Do you know the significance of the U.S. Supreme Court Hamid versus Rumsfeld that recognized the power of the U.S. government to detain enemy combatants, including U.S. citizens, for sedition and treason? His answer? Yes. Judge Kavanaugh, do you know the significance of the U.S. Supreme Court decision Ex parte Quern that allowed a U.S. military tribunal to try and execute Nazi German saboteurs captured and tried on American soil? End quote. Kavanaugh, yes. You see, Lindsey Graham threw the gauntlet down, and so did Kavanaugh. I'm on the court, restitution of the rule of law. Military tribunals, deep state, your puppets, can try to make it all you want unconstitutional, but guess what? It's constitutional. And that is when they launched the attack of Blasey Ford that they had been sitting on for 7 weeks, while they were coaching her, while they were manipulating her, while they were, what came out in that hearing last week, when Mitchell, the prosecutor, asked her, well, were you aware that this committee offered to fly out to California and meet with you separately? And her answer was no. Her attorneys manipulated her, attorneys that were Democratic operatives that were positioned there by Dianne Feinstein and her staff. Folks, this is about dominoes. The first is a Supreme Court 5-4 ruling body that is pro-reset of the rule of law. The second is the declassification. The third is the bringing to the forefront the institution of military tribunals and the unsealing of indictments. October is going to be big, really big. Hold on. You can join us at DaveJanda.com, our radio show every Sunday, 2 to 5 Eastern. You can join us on the free side of DaveJanda.com, tremendous amount of free content we upload. And of course on our subscription side, when we deep dive with our shows, the WTF show, our Insider Insight show, our Department of Advanced Research show, our contributing editors, and our healthcare symposium that we put on. I thank you for joining us as we end every segment. Dream big and dare to fail.